I got scary Chuck E. Cheese stories. That's how low I've fallen. I want to watch some Chuck E. Cheese stories. Alright, let's. Wait, shit. Do I have my fucking shit on? Yeah. Alright, Chuck E. Cheese, entertain me.
Remember Chuck E. Cheese? That old arcade with the singing animatronics? Of course you do. I just found out they went bankrupt recently. It made me think back to my horrible experience there as a very little kid. I was no older than 8 or 9. It was like my third and last time ever at a Chuck E. Cheese. This specific location closed down years ago, but it used to be basically down the street from our old house. My mom took my little brother and I, and she let us roam free and do our own thing and play the games, while she sat at one of the tables reading like most of the other parents. I was playing this clown game where you had to shoot the clown's teeth out with this little cannonball shooter. I was playing the games that would get me the most tickets for the prizes. I finished the game again, and the ticket shot out from the ticket slot. That's when I felt a tap on my shoulder.
Oh no. It's EDP and he went out to get cupcakes.
I turned and jumped in my seat. I was greeted with a giant Chuck E. Cheese mascot in my face. He held out his hand for a high five, and naturally I gave him his high five with a smile. He then pointed at the tickets and gave me a thumbs up. I think I just continued laughing and smiling and said, yeah. Then he pointed at the tickets once more and motioned for me to follow him. So I ripped the tickets from the slot and followed the giant mascot. As we walked across the main floor, a couple other kids around like 6 came up to him saying, "Hey Chucky," and he gave them both high fives. I kept following him, wondering if he'd tell the other kids to follow, but he didn't. He would turn back every few seconds to make sure I was still following. Finally, we made it across the main floor by the stage towards this back area, where he waved me to follow him through this employees-only door. From what I remember about how I was feeling, let's just say a combination of weird and excited. We entered this narrow hallway, and I felt kind of special for being allowed access back here. Keep in mind, I had the mind and maturity of a very young child. The mascot led me to this back room where he motioned for me to enter first, so I did. It was this small changing room type of room. It had a few lockers on one wall and one long bench extending half the length of the room. That was it. He entered the room and shut the door behind us, and I noticed he locked it. That's when I became confused and afraid. I thought he was taking me to get a bunch of free tickets. What could he possibly do in this empty room with me? He approached me, put his furry mascot hand on my shoulder, and then started rubbing from my shoulder to my arm. Then he seemed as though he tried to reach lower with both of his hands, and I pushed him off and yelled, "Stop." That's when the person in the suit lifted the mask off his head, revealing some sweaty, middle-aged man underneath. He started to remove the rest of the costume from himself as he told me to be quiet. I sat there watching,
Oh, hell nah.
shaking and plotting my way for the door. When I thought he was distracted enough by the suit, I tried to run past him for the door, but he grabbed me and told me to stop. He offered me all the free tickets I wanted if I just behaved. I started to yell and pound on the door. He tried to cover my mouth, but I think he gave up when he realized it wasn't worth the risk for him. I unlocked the door and ran back down the hall in tears. I ran back to my mom, yelling at her about what just happened. She was distraught and went right to the front desk. The girl at the front desk
Oh my god, let me guess. She doesn't believe her. Nothing has been done.
seemed to be in a panic as well, and I think she called for her supervisor. Pretty soon, all the music was stopped and the place was put into a lockdown of sorts, where all the kids were to go to their parents. A bunch of workers ran to the back section, and eventually police showed up outside. I had to give my whole story to a crowd of like 6 people, and I was extremely nervous. The man in the Chuck E. suit was some random creep who snuck into the back section of the building to dress in one of the suits and apparently lure children to the back.
What?
Realizing and looking back at that now as a grown adult is disturbing and disgusting.
No, bro, literally, he's not even an employee. He snuck in this Chuck E. Cheese.
That I was the victim of a predator. I never found out if that monster was caught.
Nah, dude, that make me mad.
I used to work for Chuck E. Cheese very briefly when I was 21 years old. I was one of the janitors slash maintenance workers. I know, not very awe-inspiring. I was broke as hell and needed money. All my job really entailed was cleaning tables and keeping the play areas generally clean. Sounds easy, but there was never really a time to just sit and take a breath. There was always something to clean or take care of. I would also be in charge of turning on and off the animatronics, opening the stage curtains, fixing busted arcade machines, and things of that nature.
How do you fix busted
My
arcade
shifts
machines?
would always be later, from like 4 to 10 p.m. My location closed at 8 on weekdays and 9 on weekends. I would stay an hour, sometimes 2 hours after, to get the place in top shape ready for the next day. So this one night, I was working past close like I usually did. Everyone had already left the building, including the other workers. So
Is this like a Five Nights at Freddy's story?
I was the last one in the building. I was dragging my cleaning cart around the arcade area. I had already turned off all the game machines. I was by that space-themed arcade machine where you had to press the button at the right moment to stop the light on the jackpot bulb. As I was passing by this machine, the space-themed music suddenly emits from the machine at a very loud volume, and all the lights start flashing again. I felt like my heart was in my throat. That's how much it startled me. I fiddled with my keys to access the control port of the machine to turn it off again. I'd never seen anything like that happen before. It suddenly just freaked me out, only because I was all alone in that big building pretty late at night. The weirdness didn't stop there though. By this point in the night, I had already shut down the animatronics on the stage, so when I heard Chucky's pre-recorded laugh break the silence of the room, my heart started
That's
pounding
his
again.
laugh?
The laugh was short and cut off. It almost sounded glitchy. I ditched my cleaning cart to go backstage and check on the animatronics, and I could see they were in their idle modes now, meaning they would move their limbs and heads around every so often. I would have to go to the control room to turn them off, but this was the second strange thing to happen that night. I started getting paranoid that someone else was in the building with me, but that thought was interrupted when I noticed that the Chucky animatronic was facing me, and its head angled down perfectly to look as though it was looking at me. It was bizarre. Bizarre that I was finding it that disturbing. I'm not crazy, but for my own peace of mind, with my eyes on the Chucky animatronic, I walked past it, closer to the control room. I waited there for a few seconds, and then the animatronic spun 90 degrees to face me once more, perfectly. I swear it was once again looking right at me, and then the laughter emitted once again from the animatronic. But in a creepy, glitchy, cut-off manner, this time much louder, obviously because I was right next to it. I ran to the control room to hit the switch to turn everything off on the stage once more. I left the control room, and the Chucky animatronic was still facing the direction it was moments before. I left the stage through the curtain and just felt uneasy. I was starting to think maybe it was all just getting to my head. But that's when I heard the horrible laugh again come from the stage behind the curtains. That was the last straw. I took my card, clocked out, and left. I texted my boss the next day that I had to leave early because I was feeling extremely sick. He said it wasn't a problem, but he never mentioned anything about the animatronics being left on. And when I asked him if the animatronics had some kind of motion detecting feature to look at people, he said no, they didn't. I'm not the most superstitious guy, but I firmly believe I wasn't the only presence in that building that night. And I don't mean there was another person in there.
Bro.
This is a story from my childhood that I don't like to look back on too much. I was 13. My mom brought my 2 little sisters and I to Chuck E. Cheese one evening. My sisters are 4 and 6 years younger than me, so it was more for them, and my mom just wanted me to come along. My mom was playing games with my sisters, so I went to do my own thing. It was my only time ever at Chuck E. Cheese, so I was trying to play every game at least once. Eventually, a worker in a red polo shirt came up to me. He was in his lower to mid-20s, I'd say. He didn't seem that old. He asked me if I wanted some more tokens. I said, yeah, sure. He told me to follow him. He He led me through this sketchy back door, which led to a back exit. I asked him where he was leading me. He said to his truck. He told me not to tell anyone, but that he had access to all the tokens he wanted and just kept piles of them in his car. I stopped following when I realized he was leading me to his car. I told him my mom would be mad. He tried to push that I follow him a little more, but gave up. Before I walked back inside, he asked for my AIM username, and I gave it to him. I was excited for new friends on AIM.
AIM?
For those of you who don't know, AIM was an instant messenger that was all the rage before smartphones and texting really became a thing. I don't remember his username. All I know, it was something with his name in it, which was Ben. I would sign on to AIM every single night, including that night after Chuck E. Cheese. I signed in, and I had a few friends online. Next thing I knew, I got a message from Ben, so I added him to my buddy list. He said, "Hey, it's Ben from earlier." I replied, "What's up?" and we started chatting. He chatted with me as if we were good friends already. I asked him how he was able to get all the tokens he wanted, and he said it's easy when you work there. He told me he was gonna come to my house that night with a bunch of tokens. I told him, no, it's okay. And he told me, no, it's fine. You live really close to me anyway. I replied, how do you know where I live? And he said he followed my mom's van on our way home.
Oh.
I blocked his account immediately. I was beyond scared. I told my friends about it on AIM. Some of them said I should tell my parents or call the police. But I waited. Maybe he was bluffing. But no, he wasn't. I heard a truck pull up outside through my open window. I looked out the window and saw the black truck that Ben guy was leading me towards earlier. I saw him get out from the truck, and I know he spotted me because he started walking over to my window. I pulled the window in and locked it, and then shut the blind. By that point, he was already halfway to my window. He was waving his arms at me. I ran to my mom to tell her. She didn't find it funny, thinking I was kidding at first. But I convinced her after she looked out the window and saw the black truck begin to speed down the road. My mom wanted me to show her the AIM conversation, but I couldn't, as I had deleted him off my buddy list and blocked him. My parents called the police, of course, but that was just for peace of mind. They couldn't do anything besides make a report. The next day, my mom called the Chuck E. Cheese and asked about a Ben. They said they had no Bens who worked there. There were also no employees matching that guy's description. The Chuck E. Cheese eventually handed the CCTV footage from the day before to the police department for an investigation, which turned up no results.
Of course.
My family never went to a Chuck E. Cheese ever again.
Nah, dude. Man. Alright, we got Mr. Police Officer Stories. This seems fun.
My partner and I got a breaking and entering call late one Friday night. I'd never responded to a call like that before, but it sounded serious. A young woman was home alone and heard footsteps downstairs, but when she was on the 911 call, the call was cut before she could give her location in the house. We arrived to the home and entered through the front door, which was left unlocked, which later proved to be how the break-in occurred. Both of us shouted police with our guns drawn, expecting the suspect to be armed. We called out for Anna. That was the homeowner's name. Anna never called back to us. We knew she must have been scared and didn't want to give away her position to the intruder.
Oh, this is a cop
We
story.
checked the whole first floor, which was small and quick. There didn't appear to be a basement. A door shutting upstairs drew my partner and I's attention. I led the way upstairs. All the doors had been shut, so I couldn't really tell which door I had just heard. I told my partner to check that one while I checked this one. I turned the doorknob and kicked the door open, immediately lifting my gun into the air. It was a dark, empty room. I heard breathing in this room, though. It sounded like a woman's breathing. I looked at the closet door, which was slid slightly open, and I saw half a face, mostly someone's eye, peeking through the opening. Resting assured it was Anna, I lowered my gun and said, "Anna, it's okay, you can come out." But she didn't, and the breathing quieted. Then my partner in the next room over called, "Jason, I found her." My feeling in that room suddenly went from at ease
what the fuck?
to ready to throw up. I raised my gun again and yelled, "Come out of the closet." They did not obey, so I called my partner into the room. He turned on the light, and we opened the closet together
Uh-oh.
to see this disheveled, drugged-out woman holding one of
Oh my god.
Savannah's kitchen knives. With 2 guns pointed at her, she dropped the knife and we brought her into the precinct. Thank God I was stationed in a safer area of town the next year, and I haven't gotten any breaking and entering calls since then.
Dude, I fucking gonna have nightmares. Story 2.
As a state trooper for 15 years, I've experienced my share of close calls and uncomfortable situations. This happened over a decade ago when I was still relatively new to the job. I was on night patrol on an interstate about 2:30 a.m. I usually had my car parked near a bush to hide myself from view from oncoming speeding cars. But at this hour, I didn't really try to hide too much. I was moving my car and pulled into a gas station that sat on the side of the interstate. It was closed, not because it was late, but rather it was temporarily out of service. I noticed 2 cars parked in the lot next to each other. There was nothing immediately suspicious about this, but I kept my eye out just because strange things happen at this hour. I parked my car in a way that I could watch the interstate as well as these 2 parked cars. I realized that I didn't see anyone in either of those cars though. Now this was quite suspicious. The station was closed and there were no workers here. I exited my car with my hands on my belt and approached the 2 cars. I tapped on the windows for the both of them. Nobody in either of them, as I suspected. I began to walk around the lot as the occasional car zipped down the interstate. I went up to the glass of the closed gas station and knocked on it. I turned around, dumbfounded. Whose cars were these? Just as I imagined they could be in the woods somewhere, I heard someone running from around the building and asked for my help. He was some young 20-something-year-old man, like me at the time. He said his car wouldn't start and needed help. Now, I told him right away that I was no mechanic and that he'd need to call a towing company, but he practically begged me to just check under the hood for a second. He ran to his driver's side and popped the hood. I looked under the hood with him, not really knowing what to look for because I wasn't much of a car guy at the time. I asked if his battery died, and when I looked at him, I took note that he was looking around very oddly. He replied, "I don't think so." I then looked at the car parked next to him. "Whose car is that?" I asked him. He said he didn't know. He simply parked there to see if there was a porta potty in the back or something. I was reading through this kid's bullshit. Something was up here. As I looked back at the guy from the 2 cars, I saw him looking back at something or someone. I turned and saw another guy approaching me with a knife in his hand. I unholstered my gun and aimed it at him. He dropped the knife and put his hands up. They both did. I immediately called for backup while keeping the 2 at gunpoint. I cuffed the one who was holding the knife and placed him in the back of my car, and then grabbed the second pair from my glove box and cuffed the second guy. When backup arrived, I went to the back of the gas station where the first guy had originally approached me from. What I found there still holds up to be the most disturbing thing I'd ever seen in all of my years as a trooper. There were 2 fresh, dead bodies wrapped in garbage bags, cut up in 2 pieces each to fit in the bags. Along with them was also a shovel sitting on the concrete by the woods. The 2 were planning on burying the bodies somewhere in the woods off the interstate, and it seemed they were in a hurry. These 2 were a couple of the dumbest people I had ever interacted with.
Why even ask him?
Being that out of anywhere in the state, they chose to bury 2 bodies off an interstate behind a gas station. Going to sleep at night knowing you almost had your throat slit by somebody on the job messes with you, and I didn't get much sleep for a while.
Nah, that's insane. Story 3.
I'm a rookie cop currently working the night shift. I'm just a normal patrol officer conducting traffic stops and responding to basic 911 calls. 2 nights in a row last week, I was called to the same house. Dispatch had called me to check out the house as someone had dialed 911 and hung up. The house was a couple miles from me, in my patrol zone. I arrived to the house quickly and turned up the dirt driveway through the trees onto the property. The house was dark, no lights on, no cars, nothing. I parked my squad car on the far right side of the property and went to the front door, taking note that all the windows were properly shut. I knocked on the door and no answer. The door was also locked. For my immediate guess, the place was abandoned, for years by the looks of it. I called to dispatch that the place was abandoned and nobody was there. Then I left. The next night, I was working the same shift, and around a similar time, I got a call from dispatch that there was another 911 call from the same house. Only this time, someone could be heard crying on the other end before the call ended. I was asked to check out the house again. This time I was a little further away, but still the drive wasn't too bad. I pulled up the dirt driveway again onto the property, and again, no lights, no cars. I approached the front door again, and this time it was left cracked open. I knocked on the door while holding the doorknob to prevent the door from pushing open. No answer. I called to dispatch that I would be entering the house, which I was cleared to do since the crying over the line implied an urgent situation inside the house.
Yeah.
I drew my gun and entered the house. I tried to find a light switch without luck. I had my gun in one hand and now my flashlight in the other. The house was mostly silent, besides the sound coming from behind a closed door. It was the basement door. I called to dispatch for backup in a whisper. The sound coming from down in that basement was a tone, like a dial tone of a phone. I started walking down the stairs as quietly as possible. I got to the bottom and followed the noise of the dial tone to an old, early 2000s style landline speakerphone. The phone was off the hook, and it was playing the dial tone on speakerphone. I put the phone on the hook to silence the noise. It was almost as if it were planned to happen like this. As soon as the phone hit the hook, I heard a muzzled laughing type noise in a far corner of the basement. I turned around and there was some guy standing opposite me in the basement with his hand over his mouth, and he appeared to be laughing, but it wasn't this genuine laugh. It was more like a sickly, mentally unstable laugh. The guy was holding something in his other hand. I couldn't see what it was at first.
It's a knife.
But when he raised his hand up to his head, I realized he was holding a revolver. I aimed my gun at him and yelled to drop the weapon. He paused as he had his revolver to his head, apparently about to pull the trigger. So I shot him in the arm twice, causing him to drop the gun. He screamed in pain as I cuffed him and brought him upstairs. I requested a medical team at once. A second squad car pulled up, as did an ambulance a few minutes later. The scariest part about this for me was not that I had to shoot a man in the arm twice, but that I was mere seconds away from seeing a man spray his brains out onto the wall.
Oh.
My partner and I got a radio call of a welfare check, which is just a check on the welfare of a person. A woman's ex-boyfriend called because he received text from his ex stating that she wished it had never ended and that she could no longer go on without him. We get to the place, knock, pound, etc. No answer. We call the number the ex provided and get an answer and a hang-up, so we hear it from the outside window and know she's in there. We say we're going to break the door down if she doesn't answer. We hear some slurred mess of speech. Door unlocks but doesn't open. We open the door to find a young woman, wet, naked, pale as hell, and swaying in one spot. Her hands bleeding. We call a rescue ambulance and she's off to the hospital. Now to the creepy part. None of the lights would turn on, so we conduct a safety search and find candles lit in the bedroom and bathroom. On the walls were Bible scriptures written in her blood and a tub of brown water, the water being mixed with old blood. I don't know how she survived because that water was dark. She had been sitting in it for approximately 3 to 4 hours.
Holy shit, dude.
Before getting transferred to a different county, I used to work as a police officer in Burlington, New Jersey. Burlington is not a safe place. They say that crime there is 88% higher than the rest of Jersey. And having worked there for a year, I got to learn that firsthand. Now, there would be a lot of break-ins, robberies, assaults, and after a while, you'd get used to those calls. Sometimes, you'd get pretty strange, unsettling calls, though. This was one of them. Most Burlington locals are familiar with the McNeil Mansion, a long abandoned mansion that sits right on the Delaware River. The home was constructed in 1894 to serve as a residence for Andrew H. McNeil, as well as his wife and 4 daughters. The house had been abandoned and left to decay since 1974 and is now owned by the county. Sometimes there would be kids trespassing on the property to check it out. Sometime past midnight, I was told over the radio by dispatch to investigate the property, as there was a report by a neighboring house that there were some people seen hopping the fence to the property. Upon entering the property, I noticed a light coming from inside one of the upstairs windows. Part of me inside died a little as I realized someone was in there, and that it was my job to go in and get them out. I requested backup into my radio and stated I would be entering the mansion to pursue a trespasser. I scanned the outside of the house once more, looking for an entry point, and found one of the lower windows was smashed open and easily accessible, and that's how I made my way in. Right away, first thing I did was make my presence as a police officer known. I was inside what appeared to once be the living room of the mansion, rubble covering the whole floor. I heard footsteps upstairs. I shouted again, expecting them to come down the stairs. When they didn't, then it was my job to come up. I went up the stairway and started walking around. There was no way to hide my steps with all the litter and rubble on the ground. I heard something fall in a nearby room.
The fuck?
This is when the worry and fear really started to kick in. At this point, I had my hand on my gun holster, ready to react. Though let me tell you, having a gun doesn't make you feel invincible. I shouted again to try and draw out the trespassers from the room. You ever hear that dumb, overused quote, "I didn't sign up for this" in the movies? Well, I was pretty much feeling that exact way.
Okay.
I stepped into the room that I thought was where the noise had echoed from. It was some small, weird room with a bunch of windows with blurred glass film. There was a sliding closet door open about 3/4, so they had to be in there. I took out my pepper spray and gave one more warning that I was a police officer before yanking the closet open fully. It was empty. This made no sense. I looked around the room and the windows. They looked to an outside deck, and there was someone standing behind one of them. I couldn't see anything about their features other than the outline of their body. But then I realized there were people at the other windows too. The way they were all looking at me through the window film, such a ghostly appearance they gave, like a picture from a kid's horror novel. I found the door to that deck in an adjacent room. When I stepped out, the 3 figures standing at the windows were gone. I didn't see any other way off the deck besides the door I came out through. I saw the flashing lights of a police car through a bunch of trees, parked on the same lot as me. Another officer announced his and his partner's arrival to me over the radio. I met the officers outside the house and pointed up at the deck where I saw 3 people standing. They were creeped out as well when I described how they all just stood there at their own windows looking in. We searched the whole mansion together. I eventually came to a small room with a window on the first floor. And once again, something was outside this window. I had to step closer to figure out if it was a person's head or not. When I got too close, the object lowered below the window. I radioed the other officers to go outside with me. We looked around the whole property and didn't find anyone. We searched for another 10-15 minutes before closing up all the entrances to the house and moving on.
Yeah.
The scariest part of this for me was definitely seeing 3 ghost-like silhouettes all standing at their own of the 3 windows to that deck, looking inside at me.
Nah, those fucking shits are crazy as shit, dude.